start. Okay, let's see if we can get started. Now I don't see you because there are so bright lights, but we still have some people entering into the room for this, I believe, interesting session. And also, hopefully, we have some colleagues and interested joining us online, live, or perhaps watching this afterwards. I will get started very soon. Just making sure that we have colleagues entering, and perhaps we could close the doors. So welcome to all of you, Excellencies, distinguished delegates and colleagues. Welcome, and I assume you've been here now for other interesting sessions to the GPEDC Summit and the session on integrated approaches to effectively finance sustainable development. And this should, of course, be in the interest of everyone in the times that we're in. My name is Ulrika Moder. I am Assistant Secretary General with United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, that is proudly co-hosting also the Secretariat for the Global Partnership in New York, where I'm leading the Bureau for External Relations and Advocacy. That is the broad partnerships that we as UNDP bring together, and part of that is definitely the global partnership that we have here with us these days. It has been said already before, but I want to reiterate again, the success of the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement and other important agreements set in the United Nations really depend on the ability for the international community, but also for countries and communities to mobilize the much needed investments through sustainable and also inclusive approaches. Yet countries, as we know around the world, throughout not least the past years, but also for the years to come, are facing true challenges with regards to financing. And also as the number of partners who finance sustainable development grows, both public and private, international and also domestic, so does the numbers of channels and modalities. And this is, as you know, what we also want to make sure can change in the way that it is actually a coordinated, a transparent approach that also yields the possibilities for accountability. In a world with 1.54 quadrillion US dollars of assets, the real issue is, of course, perhaps not the money, but really how the money is spent and by whom, who benefits or not. Are we continuously going to leave people behind? And what we believe is important is to make sure that we have appropriate policy and spending choices, informed choices by decision makers, so that we jointly can pursue the paths that are right, that are smart, that are effective, and that are of benefit to all. At the country level, a growing number of governments, that is actually more than 85 and counting, are using something called the Integrated National Financing Frameworks. And they do that to build a more sustainable financing architecture and deepen the cooperation between public, private, and civil society actors. These are truly and increasingly country-led processes that are typically overseen by cross-government committees led by the ministries of finance or sometimes also the ministries of planning. 39 out of these 85 countries will develop a financing strategy for their national medium-term or recovery plan for the first time. And another 25 of these countries are strengthening what is already existing financing strategies to factor in the role of both private and public finance, and also to open up the dialogues also for a broader range of actors in country. Through these strategies, countries can set out an agenda of change to the government of public and private finance. They can find ways to unlock and align capital with the sustainable development goals. A couple of countries have launched their financing strategies already, including Nigeria and Mongolia, and around 40 others will develop these in the next or upcoming 12 months. Through these strategies, countries also articulate the financing priorities that development partners can engage and align with. And as you can tell, this is really at the heart of what we're discussing with regards to the principles of development effectiveness. There is already good momentum built from the G20 members. For instance, in October last year, the G20 leaders endorsed the G20 framework of voluntary support to the Integrated National Financial Frameworks, or as we sometimes call them, the INFFs. And this aims to align international support to these country-led INFF processes and connect the domestic constituencies that is being built in countries of G20 members with the priorities countries that are also articulating through their INFFs. So there are a lot of processes that we believe can be mutually reinforcing here, and we see an increasing interest. And in this session, I'm very much looking forward to hear from countries and partners about their experience of these integrated national financial frameworks and other financing tools and efforts, and discuss how effective development cooperation principles can help partners to align and, not least, of course, to see how we can leverage all resources of finance to achieve the sustainable development goals. So we believe that the INFFs could really be that centerpiece to anchor many of the discussions that are taking place here, and to really truly anchor the principles and show that they can make change happen for real in countries and for people. But to start with, I would like to invite Mr. Akihiko Nishio, who is the Vice President of Development Finance at the World Bank, to give us an overview of the current trends in proliferation and fragmentation, as we also heard in the very beginning of the meeting here in Geneva. So, Mr. Nishio, you have the floor, and I hope, yes, we have you with us on the screen. Most welcome, and over to you. And we don't have sound yet, so let's see.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can. Over to you.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Erika, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to speak to you today. Before starting, I would like to thank the organizers of this summit for the opportunity to set the stage for this important discussion on aid effectiveness. A special thank you to Erika for moderating this session, to the distinguished panelists for joining us, and to all the colleagues who are in the room or connected virtually today. My sincere apologies for not being able to join you in person today. Let me start by saying a few words about the context of this conversation. The global aid architecture has been changing fast, and this summit could not have been timelier. The past 3 years have been a roller coaster of crises that keep derailing development progress and calls for additional resources to support developing countries. The question I'd like to pose here is how the evolution of the global aid architecture in recent years is affecting the efforts of poor countries to deal with the unprecedented challenges of the overlapping crises. Next slide, please. Okay. The research we are discussing today covers the pre-COVID period, but it has important implications for the future. It builds on the aid architecture landscape and proliferation and fragmentation papers published by the World Bank recently, and the work that other entities such as the OECD have been doing on this topic. The first objective here is to present recent trends in official financial flows, or OFF, and trends in proliferation and fragmentation of the aid architecture over the last 2 decades. The second objective is to analyze these proliferation fragmentation trends to inform a discussion in the global community as to what extent the existing global aid architecture is fit for purpose. I will illustrate this increasingly complex aid architecture with examples from Ethiopia, Mozambique, and Nepal. In that context, I would like to focus on three main insights. Next slide, please. My first insight is that financial flows to developing countries have been steadily growing over the last decade from about $429 billion a year to just above $600 billion a year in real terms. As you can see from the graph, the two categories in blue, which correspond to public finance, public grants in dark blue and public loans in light blue, have increased by just 2% per year. The three other categories on top, from private and non-official sources, have grown more rapidly by about 10% a year. While in 2010, public finance represented almost two-thirds of financial flows to developing countries, today, public and private finance are almost equal. We can say that overall, this is a welcome development. Next slide, please. In this context, it is important to discern the full picture of loans to developing countries, where they come from, and what they are used for. This graph shows the volumes of public loans extended to developing countries over the past decade from the 15 largest providers. During 2010 to 2019, official loan commitments by official donors amounted to $1.7 trillion. In that context, it is noteworthy that there are several emerging economies in the list of top lenders, such as China, Russia, India, and Saudi Arabia. In fact, over this period, 22% of bilateral loans to developing countries came from the BRIC countries. At the creditor level, the World Bank Group provided the highest volume of loan financing with a combined $357 billion extended globally, followed by China, the Asian Development Bank, Japan, and the IMF. Next slide, please. The second main insight from our analysis is that the growth in official financial flows was accompanied by the proliferation of official finance providers at the source and at the recipient level. Official financial flow commitments more than doubled in real terms in the last 2 decades, but this increase in commitments was accompanied by a sharp increase in the number of countries and institutions providing official finance around the world. This chart shows proliferation at the donor level. The number of donors increased from 53 to 103 between 2001 and 2020. There was even a more explosive growth of 2.5 times in the number of entities that provided official finance, from 212 to 544. Perhaps the most striking finding was the rise in the number of bilateral agencies within donor countries that provide official finance, which increased from 167 to 442, or by 2.5 times. Next slide, please. Let's now look at how this extraordinary growth in donor agencies translates at the recipient level by looking at the examples of Ethiopia, Mozambique, and Nepal. If we go from left to right, the number of agencies doubled for Ethiopia between 2001 and 2020. The growth of donor agencies in Mozambique was 70% and Nepal 87%. This increase in donor agencies led to each of the three countries engaging with more than 150 agencies between 2016 and 2020. In the case of Ethiopia, the authorities have had to partner with more than 200 agencies. In addition to that, by 2019, 3 out of every 4 transactions were implemented by entities other than the recipient government. And on average, 60% of all official financial flows were channeled outside country systems. This type of proliferation taxes the capacity of countries and poses an aid coordination challenge for partner and recipient governments. Next slide, please. The emergence of new donors and entities could, in theory, be a positive development for the development global efforts. However, this is my third and final insight. In practice, this has been accompanied by a growing fragmentation of aid flows. We are seeing a larger number of smaller individual commitments made to developing countries. Since the year 2000, the average size of officially financed activities in developing countries has decreased by about 1/3, from about $2.2 million to $1.4 million today in real terms. Like proliferation, this fragmentation seems to be mostly concentrated in bilateral activities and driven by the size of grants, which constitute the vast majority of official financial flow transactions. The average size of ODA grants has decreased sharply from an average value of $1.5 million in 2000 to only $800,000 today in real terms. Thus, the pie has been cut into smaller pieces, increasingly so over time. This may be problematic as it could result in significant transaction costs for recipient countries as they face severe challenges, including those of debt distress. In this context, we are preparing a series of aid efficiency at a glance reports on aid proliferation and fragmentation at the recipient country level, so please stay tuned for that. We would like to use these reports to illustrate the severity of the situation in many recipient countries. Next slide, please. So to conclude, an increase in official financial flows to developing countries over the last 2 decades has been accompanied by a substantive proliferation in donors and donor funding entities and a growing fragmentation of aid. The increasingly more complex aid architecture makes development more challenging for poor countries, which are struggling to deal with the overlapping crises. The majority of aid is currently implemented by entities other than recipient governments. 17 years after the Paris Declaration, it is hard to say that the countries are in the driver's seat. In this context, it is imperative for the global aid community to work together to reverse these trends. The collaboration needs to be far more inclusive than before and include non-traditional donors. So these are what I wanted to share with you today as a way to set the stage for the remainder of this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Akihiko Nishio. And for those of you who came a bit late, who is one of the vice presidents of the World Bank, for this very useful overview, or stock taking if you wish. And indeed, while we do appreciate a wide range of actors to come together for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, we can really see the proliferation and the need even more perhaps now than when we started this journey to make sure that countries are actually leading this and that the results that we will see are actually based on country ownership. It is now, and we will Akihiko, we will have you joining us still on the screen, but it is now my pleasure to invite some other panelists. So I will start, and then I will join you also at this seat. with Her Excellency Princess Ade Fulire, who is the Senior Special Assistant of the President to Nigeria on the Sustainable Development Goals. Most welcome. And then we have also His Excellency Mr. Antonio Freitas, who's the Vice Minister of Finance from Timor-Leste, that we will also hear from with regards to interesting experiences. We have Ms. Marietta Jager, who is the Deputy Director General of the Directorate General for International Partnerships, also called INTPA, from the European Commission. Let's see where we have Marietta here. And last but not least, Ms. Nerea Craviotto, who is Senior Policy and Advocacy Officer with Eurodad, also known as the European Network on Debt and Development. Most welcome as well. And I will join you. So starting with such an important and interesting country as Nigeria, Princess, what are really the challenges that Nigeria aims to address by pursuing the integrated national financial framework? And also, how have you gone about to establish this framework to help you to really make the strategic choices? We're very much looking forward to hear your experiences. So over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. And it's nice to be here again to discuss this very important meeting for the benefit of Nigeria, Africa, and the world. Sustainable Development Goals, as we all know, is a call for action to eradicate poverty, ensure that the people live a happy life. And to me, the 5 Ps is very germane. The people, the peace, prosperity, partnership, and planet. Gives us the insights of all what we think needed to be done to ensure that we captured everyone, put the framework in place, the action plan, and all that is needed. Knowing fully that Nigeria is the biggest, is the leader of Africa, and we must lead by example. During the MDGs days, we joined as a member state very late, about 7 or 8 years after. And after the expiration of the MDGs, we look at the gains and the failures. We base our planning based on the survey that was conducted, a baseline study to know where we are, how do we move forward. And we quickly acted on SDGs by setting up the office, my office, as a coordinating office, a standalone office to coordinate all the ministry, agencies, and departments of government to develop the action plan, implementation plan, the framework. And first, what is interesting about Nigeria is that Nigeria, I think, is the first member state to set up the private sector advisory group for SDGs, the public sector working with the private sector. We set up the civil society strategy group to monitor, to advise, where we have all the NGO embedded in that group. We also set up the Presidential Council on SDG. All what the private sector does, and they are doing, the civil society organization is being reviewed at the presidential level of government, where we have the representative of the private sector, the donor agencies, the UN system, the president himself is the chair of the committee. Our office is the secretariat. We have the legislators also. So all the critical stakeholders, state actors, non-state actors are there at that committee to review periodically what needed to be done. We're in the process of all of that, and we prioritize 7 goals according to our own national development priorities. And okay, apart from that, we look at what are the critical areas. And that gave us the insight when the COVID came, we quickly address the situation. Like I said yesterday when I was making the presentation, the world they are looking at Africa, how do they cope with COVID? Fortunately for us, we were able to manage the situation, and there was no number of deaths that the world expected from Africa, especially in Nigeria, because we started and we engaged all the stakeholders to work with us. After we concluded that, we also worked on independent evaluation of SDG goal 3 and 4, which was launched. We also worked with voluntary national reviews. We've presented 2, and 2017 and 2020 because of COVID. The third one, we hosted the AU in Nigeria on voluntary national reviews. All of this, the conclusion of that was, how do we do the costing? What does it cost us to implement SDGs and get no one and leave no one behind? Because if you don't know the costing, what cost you, and how do you go about it, then becomes issues with you. So we engage the stakeholders, engage all the critical stakeholders that we have been working with. UNDP, I must say this openly, supported us to a large extent, and UN system, the donor agencies, and of course the representative of older people, people living with disabilities, the vulnerable population, the young people and women organizations are all engaged before we came to this conclusion. And everybody came together to contribute to this, and were able to look at areas where we can look at how do we increase how do we maximize the domestic resource mobilization, how do we expand our tax net, how do we reduce waste, how do we curb the illicit financial flows, how do we get the private sector to invest in the system. Investment in 2 ways. One is about CSR, one is investment, direct investment by local private sector. Then we also engage the foreign investors to invest in Nigeria. Nigeria is over 200 people. There are a lot of opportunities and possibilities in Nigeria. So look at the foreign direct investment in Nigeria. All of that, we looked at how do we use innovation, innovative way in getting funding. How do we increase the funding from our donors? Looking at what we have done, which was very impressive, and still trying to do more of that. How do we now get more support from for example, 2 of our major investors in Nigeria, Dangote Group, is building the largest refinery in Nigeria. That's another way, and it will reduce the importation of fuel to about 60%. Is another investment. The largest plant for fertilizer in Nigeria, which has helped the farmers. Remember, in 2016, Nigeria went on recession, and by 2018, we're out of recession because we engaged the farmer, local farmers. Agriculture was what took us from recession. We want to capitalize on that also to ensure that we maximize the opportunity and they get. So there are many ways we are looking at, and as we have launched the INFF report at the margins of the 77th United Nations General Assembly, we've started a committee now. The Nigerian government is putting the seed fund down so that other donor agencies will come to add to it. And our seed fund is in the budget of 2023 going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing some highlights of this experience, and we will definitely make sure that you can also learn even more, and we will have the opportunity, hopefully, for some questions as well at the end. We will make sure also we can perhaps share some links. But moving then to you, Mr. Vice Minister, and the experience in Timor-Leste, I mean, if you could also share what made you take the decision, how you have worked to strategically align also your planning with the Sustainable Development Goals, and what kind of advice you would also give to other countries that are listening into this, as we need to learn from each other.
Ulrika, thank you very much for the question. Firstly, I'd like to thank you organizers for this opportunity to share our experience on financing for sustainable development. And it is a pleasure to be part of this important panel this afternoon. To answer your question, yes, indeed, we are one of the first countries to have finalized our INFF with the technical assistance of UNDP Timor-Leste. The benefit of the process have been successful, and we have a few lessons to share with all of you. First, it has helped us for a unified vision for our developments, which translate into a great ownership of the development process. Our population is young, the country is young, we have a structural issue such as food insecurity and malnutrition. There are many challenges in education and health outcomes. We have long been aware of many problems, but the INFF process have helped us put together the fragmentation to form unified vision for our developments, namely solving the Timorese job market puzzles. Effective financing for sustainable development is possible only when we are clear of the goal we are trying to be achieved. We now know that all of our effort must be put together in addressing the supply and demand in the signed contracts of the Timorese job market. The second benefit we get on the IMF process is help us to develop a country-specific financing strategy for sustainable developments. The IMF process has helped us as catalog financing strategy that responding to the unique risks we facing as the young ST informed by the country-specific policy and institutional bidding constraint. Third benefit we get from IMFF, the process has helped us to prioritize our focus on the result. With the help of the UNDP, we are developing an SDG-aligned monitoring and the result framework, which will help us to tracking the result achievement through development financing in Timor-Leste. In the next fiscal year, this will give more helping as well the information to us to increase allocative efficiency of the public resource in our general budgets. The governance framework for INFF additionally will enhance the transparency of the PFM process, give all the stakeholders, include our citizens, the CSO and development partners, the ability to oversee how efficient and effective we are utilizing our resource. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Different countries, different realities, and definitely a moment to learn from each other as we see 85 countries. Now, moving quickly, Marietta, to you and the fact that the EU has, throughout all this time, actually accompanied also the process of effective development cooperation and development effectiveness, as we now call it, with appreciated different ways of supporting through budget. This has, of course, been a true token of your belief in this, using this instrument. So we would be interested to hear how you now discuss different kinds of budget support also in the support of the Sustainable Development Goals and to bring together these processes.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ulrika, and thank you for having European Commission on this very important panel. And as you said, yes, indeed, the budget support is central to the EU international partnership, and one of our main tool of implementation also of the cooperation with the countries. We are strong believers in the budget support, as you know, and basically we provide the direct financial transfers to the countries that are engaging in sustainable development reforms. And of course, with the reforms, they are supporting the SDGs, and all our budget support portfolio allows us to support the whole range of 17 ADGs. So we can say that the EU was really a pioneer in the budget support, and I think we have more than 20 years of experience in delivering budget support. And that means that we remain budget support champion, and I can share with you that on average in the last 10 years, I think that in our portfolio budget support presents around 40% of what we generously call quite a huge budget. And of course, what is even more important that I would like to share with you is that we do deliver budget support only in the form of grants. And this is unique because, as we heard before, also World Bank is doing it in loans, and the EU is the only partner that is doing that in grants, and this is particularly welcomed, I believe, with our partner countries now in the increasingly challenging times with the debt distress and also already difficult and challenging situation going from one crisis to another, as the previous speakers have said. So I would say that the EU is the world top provider in the budget support. And of course it comes with conditionality, and as you know, we align with the partner countries' priorities. I explained that before. We do the local-led ownership and alignment with their priorities for a long time, I would say technically and financially. And of course, you know, there are a list of criteria that the partner countries need to fulfill in order to be eligible for the budget support. But it promotes also the results and with the incentives that we are giving. And I can tell you that we have a budget support now in some 80 countries worldwide, the majority in the sub-Saharan Africa, but also in North Africa. And in some countries it goes, you know, up to the 75% of the support, like Nepal, we discussed with the minister this morning. And I believe that supports not only sectorial priorities of the partner countries, but also with a portfolio and designs, or it's a general or a sectorial budget support, basically contribute to each and every SDG, and also when it comes to general one, to SDG 16 and 17. I can go on later with the questions, but I would say that together with IFF, sorry, I got such a horrible cold, you know, probably I'm not the only one. But I would say that together with the INFFCs and also the TOS present basically essential tool for accelerating progress towards the SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marietta, and also to say that the UN and the EU are really working well together in the support of the INFFs, as we believe in them as a key driver, as we've heard also from
And
key
we are
countries.
strong supporters,
Yeah.
as you know,
Yeah.
of the INFFs from
Yeah.
the beginning, and we will continue to support you, especially this year when we started with the facility, and we have hopes about the delivery. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Now, very much needed, I think, also as we recall the presentation in the very beginning here with regards to proliferation. So now, Ms. Craviotto, I shared with you that I have been accompanying also the development effectiveness agenda from the civil society perspective way back in time, also knowing that you try from the civil society to be supportive to this process. But when you see the presentations here about the proliferation and the attempts from countries like Timor-Leste, Nigeria, to bring all of this together in something that makes sense for people and planet in difficult times, what do you think civil society and international civil society actors, but also of course the local actors that you work with, can do in support of making change happen, and that the principles of development effectiveness actually can become a reality on the ground. Over to you.
Thank you, Ulrika, and thank you also for the opportunity to the organizers to share some ideas. This is a perspective because, I mean, your question is very, very large. But, I mean, I want to start by mentioning that the current context of multiple and interconnected crises are rising the challenges and to meet the SDGs, and the stakes have never been higher. And which ask all of us to really work on the same direction, and to share a bit to respond to your question on how CSOs work on this development finance landscape. I would say that our work has never been more complex than now to follow and track what is happening with development finance. And what we are observing is issues with transparency, issues on accountability that are arising across the development finance landscape, from debt sustainability to new aid modalities. On aid, for example, while aid is modestly increasing, this is what we are observing is by tracking aid figures, is that this is not necessarily translating into more concessional resources reaching the countries in the global south. And to give just an example, I was checking this weekend some of the aid statistics, and what I saw is within the last 10 years, the average of percentage of aid subject to support multi-year program at country level has been a modest 40% in 10 years, which for us raises questions around not only access to concessional resources, but also about country ownership and inclusiveness of local actors, including civil society. Instead, what we are seeing more and more is aid diverted towards testing new modalities to leverage funding from the private finance. And this is, for example, the case with the private sector window IDA 20 from the World Bank, or the Global Gateway in the EU context. And in both of these initiatives, we as civil society are asking, where are the safeguards on these initiatives and reporting mechanisms to ensure that these are the best use of limited concessional resources. This is also, this complexity of these new instruments are also putting obstacles on our role as part of the accountability process as CSOs, as accountability actors. What are the implications of this complicated finance landscape in our CSO advocacy demands? And as CSOs across the world in different platforms and spaces, we are working together towards reclaiming the aid agenda to a path of sustainable development set by countries of the Global South in a meaningful dialogue with key actors around the table and from the ground. We also want to see a renewed commitment to international aid and a move from a charity-based mindset to one based on justice and reparations. And this will require as well a real political commitment from the donor community to meet the 0.7 and to challenge the diversion of aid from where is more needed. When it comes to the aid effectiveness agenda, we also want to reclaim basic effectiveness principles such as ownership, transparency, and mutual accountability, which must apply across the board, including new actors, instruments, and modalities. And we want to see a renewed commitment towards making those principles to meeting the implementation. In addition, real multilateral efforts to stop the bleeding of resources from countries in the Global South, being through corporate tax avoidance or evasion, needs to be tackled, or the servicing of unsustainable debts that also needs to be tackled. And last but not least, in 2021, 358 human rights defenders across the world were killed and hundreds more were beaten, detained, and charged. So what we, among our demands what we want to see is our governments across the world to ensure an enabling environment for CSOs to operate, which asks, among others, for appropriate laws and policies and a political space that allow free association and participation, and hand in hand with frameworks that protect and defend our human rights defenders. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope and do believe that we will see a renewed commitment with regards to the principles. But the question is, of course, how do we make also these principles a reality on the ground? And I think we've heard some key examples here. But I will also have the opportunity also to call on some colleagues here in the audience also to hear a bit more, because there are so many interesting examples to accompany, and we'll make sure also that you can follow us online and tune in to some of these. But Mr. Sonor Louvain-Sodiri, who is the Director of Financial Markets and Insurance Division at the Ministry of Finance of Mongolia. A couple of minutes on the experience. Let's see where we have you and if we have a mic somewhere. Online.
Hello.
Here you are with us. Yes. So over to you, please.
Thank you very much. And apologies for not being able to physically attend the event. Now, let me just briefly share the experience. Now, before 2020, Mongolia used to have over 400 different policy documents. Now, over the last 2 years, we have consolidated them and identified and approved a long-term policy document, which is called Vision 2050. Now, it's also in line with the SDGs, and we have made some baseline assessments like SDG costing analysis and development finance assessments to identify the additional financing needs to fund the development policy. And this is where the INFF came in. So the 4 building blocks of Mongolia's INFF gave us an opportunity to systematically map all the relevant parts of financing and identify the key bottlenecks. So it also brought together many separate policies, such as the financial sector strategy, fiscal strategy, and investment policies, and consolidated them into a single financing strategy. We've worked together with the UN development partners, IFIs, and also civil service organizations in developing the INFF in Mongolia. Now, we identified 3 main advantages. It helped us. First one being that it helped to prioritize financial reform for sustainable development, both public and private sector. Secondly, it helped to design mechanisms of financial policies and different instruments to increase its effectiveness. And thirdly, these technical consultations among key stakeholders helped to increase the synergy in the financial policies and really to reduce the duplication of efforts. And I understand I could also ask a question in this session. So I would like to also thank Maria's information, and Mongolia was one of the countries that received policy-based grants from the European Union, and we are very gracious for that. And my question is directed at more towards EU. Now, under the INFF, we are working together with the UNDP and drafted the SDG bond framework. So we were wondering if there's any initiatives that encourage European investors to invest in SDG bonds of the developing countries, given that the current pandemic and geopolitical situation has really made it more difficult to access that and reduce the fiscal space for sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing highlights from that interesting experience. And Marietta, could I turn to you perhaps for some reflections?
Yes, thank you very much for your kind words as well.
Let's see if the mic is on.
Yes, no. Now it is, I suppose. Thank you very much for your kind recognition about our policy support. And yes, I mean, I said before that we are doing our budget support only in grants, but we are all aware that the needs are so huge that we will not be able, to cater all the needs for the sustainable development by providing only grants. So that's why European Union has pioneered quite some time ago also innovative finance. So we started with a guarantee, so-called EFSD guarantee, in 2017. And I can tell you that it worked so well that now we have a new generation of EFSD Plus. This week we are going to distribute guarantee capacity for 40 projects. I'm basically chairing it on Thursday and Friday in more than 6 billion of the guarantees. But the first call was so big that we were oversubscribed 4 times. So the interest of the IFIs is enormous. And I do believe that any support to any kind of bonds that will bring additionality and scaling up of development aid and international partnership that it's needed, it's very much welcome. So we are absolutely supporting not only financial institutions, but also private sector to come in, and also philanthropy and other donors, because we need new donors, we need new actors, and we need to join forces in order to bring the SDGs back on track and also to deliver on all our commitments that we had given over the last decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marietta. And yes, I think we all see the necessity to move from funding to finance, and that there are a number of interesting instruments, of course, with our international financial institutions, but also increasingly with the UN and at country level as well, as some of you have shared. So that's really important to learn from, and as well also to be able, I was mentioned also from civil society, to be able also to follow up on and to see if this is really leveraging the finance that we would need in an inclusive manner.
May I just add one thing, because it's very important, and we do remain, and I can firmly confirm our commitment to put a lot of resources for the human rights defenders. We have a huge program on that one, so be reassured that this part of our agenda will be absolutely respected as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And we know also, accompanying so many of these processes, that in many countries, as you also alluded to, you do invite a wide range of actors also be part of the design and the follow-up of the integrated national financial frameworks. I also have the possibility to invite Mr. Derek Ray-Hill, who, yes, indeed is in the room, to come up and share some experience. You're the director of the International Strategy and Corporate Services Charities Aid Foundation, and I'll give you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished panelist. I guess it's worth just establishing a bit of context. The Charities Aid Foundation is known today primarily as a PSO, a philanthropy services organization. We help our donors give, in the last year, about £876 million to a not-for-profit organization in one of 135 different countries around the world, which is why we're here as part of a delegation organized by Wings. But I would like to just offer a couple of suggestions and see what the panel's responses are. In the United Kingdom, we've been going for 98 years, and so we've been one of the primary actors in enabling a CSO environment in the United Kingdom that I think now is largely taken for granted. And one of the things we did over 40 years ago was we established a wholly subsidiary bank called CAF Bank, which is designed specifically to meet the needs of small to medium charities. It offers everything from more appropriate transaction charges right through to loans, investments, and other kinds of risk profiling, understanding the charitable dynamic better. And I also wanted to offer that about 20 years ago, we launched a lending program called CAF Venturesome, which lends money to charities at a rate and that rate is repaid, and that money is purely philanthropic, so given to social enterprises and not-for-profit organizations and then recycled effectively. But I wonder if either of those interventions would be useful in the territories that you know and operate in around the world.
Thank you. I'll pass the question on, but perhaps could you just share with us what WINGS is?
Oh, sorry. So WINGS is a network of members across 50 plus countries around the world that represents the role of private philanthropy, campaigns for borderless giving, and worldwide action towards philanthropic objectives. And we are, as CAF, one of the sort of main founding partners of the organization.
Thank you so much, because we also know that philanthropies, of course, have been among the number of actors that are growing and that also want to be part of the way that we can coordinate even better. So passing on the question to see if there is an interest then to see if this experience can be useful with regards to the enabling environment also of philanthropies in your countries. Anyone who would want to? Perhaps Nigeria, you have also some strong national...
Yes, I think that what is very similar to that was what we launched, I think the pre-2019 election was how to support the rural communities, rural women, and what we call trader monies, and medium and small micro enterprises. The fund we put together to support their businesses, to legislate on how the business can be formed within 24 hours, where you can start your business, government supports you. We have the Central Bank of Nigeria, who is the apex body, set aside some funding to support the business owners, and of course the market women to also be able to take care of themselves, take care of the family, contribute to the society, and to enhance development at the grassroots level. Of course, yes, we also introduced what we call Sukuk bond for infrastructure. We introduced green bond for infrastructure, and of course, the sensation went to Nigerians in diaspora. And as I speak now, in the last 3 years, we have diaspora bond. The funding is coming unexpectedly, where they are contributing to Nigeria in terms of bond and oversubscribe for development, infrastructural development. So it has helped us, and it's helping us. And that does form part of the rapid development that we witness in Nigeria. And we categorize that as private financing, private sector finance, in addition to the development finance that we have and the public sector financing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I think we would definitely be interested as well to be able perhaps to provide some links to see how we can also learn more from the experience that you have, but also the members in WINGS.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And there is also a follow-up question also from the audience that has to do with the engagement from the private sector, and you've all alluded to this, so let's see who would want to jump on the question. The question was actually directed towards you from the Nigerian experience, but I think we could ask some of you perhaps to comment on this, and that is, how could we now, with the new financing flows also from the private sector, really make sure that there is transparency and accountability accompanying also these financing flows? So not sure if you would want to comment from Timor-Leste or if you would want to start from Nigeria.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looking at the goal 17 of the SDGs, during the MDG, sorry to go back to that, we have private partnership merged with the climate change. But this time around, we have a standalone goal, which is partnership for the goals. The thinking of those that conceptualized the SDGs was that the public sector, working with the private sector, will give us a lot of mileage and speed up the achievement of SDG. It will accelerate the achievement of SDGs. and where the private sector too can benefit from the development and where their businesses are. So based on that, we quickly seized the opportunity to get all the private sector working in Nigeria, communication, banking, name it, at the level of the CEO. We mobilized them, formed them as a private sector advisory for the SDGs. And so, for example, some of them that are into education, they invest in education, providing more schools, private schools, university, tertiaries, vocational institution, and all that, in addition to what the government has provided.
And with regards to transparency
so-
and accountability, have you thought?
Yeah,
Yes.
so that's where the body is being shared by the president and shows a lot of seriousness at that level. And so that sense of belonging, sense of inclusiveness, and sense of ownership of SDG. SDG belong to all of us, and they are very happy working with the public sector, the government, on that direction. I think that helps. The expertise, the funding, the support were given to public sector, and at this level of implementation of the report, they participated actively because they are part of the system when we first started the implementation of the SDGs. And they feel the sense of ownership and sense of belonging.
Thank you so much. Perhaps some final reflections also from Timor-Leste and a small comment also from your side. And then I want to hand also back to Aki, who has accompanied us as well, you know, from his introduction. But first, Timor-Leste.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. It's related to the private sector. I also like to share is the experience from the Timor-Leste. As you know, it's the new country, but as well also we are very dependently heavily to the petroleum as unique resource to support our state budget. As well, the private sector also is very dependent to the public investments. This means for the state budgets. So the policies taken by the current government is firstly to engage the private sector. We call like the unlock the participation of the private sector, starting to doing with the loans of the loan lending programs. In Portuguese, we call the credit swap or loan, soft loan for the private sector in Timor-Leste. With the program currently government have the value chains programs, but most is the concentrate to the second major domestic revenue is the coffee. Coffee is one of the Timorese the commodity will be support of our domestic revenue. In other hand, is the government also investing through the public investments to invest more in the village level. We call the program is called the program for the village. It's supporting some of the budget support through AU. Currently, we benefit from the two countries. The direct budget support directly to the state budget from the EU as well from the Australian. My conclusion on the INFF, as I mentioned, that we are benefit on the process of the INFF, help us to develop the country-specific financing strategy for sustainable development. I do believe with the INFF, this will be like an entry point to mobilization the international financing to support especially a country like Timor, least development country, so we can grow together with another country. I thank you.
Thank you. An entry point, but hopefully also a framework for accountability and transparency. So any comment from your side on that?
I don't know if a framework, but very quickly, a quick reflection. I mean, when we are trying to monitor initiatives that are involving public and private resources, very often we are confronted with issues of confidentiality. And for us, what is key is from the moment that these operations involve taxpayers' money, those actors from the private sector need to be open to this public scrutiny. Otherwise, it cannot come from mixing private and public finance. So yeah, I mean, I come back to effectiveness principles. I mean, transparency, accountability in these development initiatives need to apply also to those private sector actors.
And to the public-private partnerships that we see increasingly in many countries. I think we need a special session on that as well. But now, as we are moving towards the closure, and with the very good introduction that we had and the overview from the World Bank, handing over to you, Aki, as well, just for some concluding reflections.
Thank you very much, Eureka, and thank you to all the panelists and also the audience for the very insightful comments. I learned a lot. I have been quite concerned about the plight of the poor countries given the overlapping crisis, but I can see that there are very strong efforts being made by the countries themselves with support from UNDP, the European Commission, the CSOs, the private sector, etc. And that is very encouraging. Now, I think our aim should be to make the work of the countries as easy as possible through lower transaction costs, with bigger impact of development aid, etc. And to get there, I think we need to look at some long-term trends in development assistance, and that's why I pointed to the trends of proliferation and fragmentation. So I would be happy to share our further research in this area. And in particular, I'm looking forward to sharing the aid effectiveness at a glance work that is forthcoming, which will elaborate on the aid effectiveness picture at the country level. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure listening to you and working with you.
Thank you so much, and also thank you to the good partnership that we see between the World Bank and the UN at country level in support of these efforts, alongside with the EU and many more partners, and not least, of course, the countries themselves, but also civil society actors. I hope that you have found these examples inspiring. There are many more examples. I was alluding to that, 85 countries and counting. We will definitely make sure, and we've had the offer also from Nigeria. Also, I believe you have some with you as well, but to make sure that you can find the information online. And we are very much looking forward to see you as well in the ECOSOC Financing for Development Forum, because we do believe, and you saw the presentation in the very beginning, this is what we have been discussing these days, that there is a need to be more thought through with regards to planning and to make the principles a reality on the ground, not least because of the many challenges that people and planet are facing. And the coming years, we have reasons to actually believe that it can be somewhat an uphill battle. So the way we come together matters. How we do things matters. This is really what the global partnership is all about. And definitely rest assured that UNDP and the UN system will be of support in these efforts alongside with other partners. So thank you for being interested. But do continue to accompany this agenda, because I think we will learn a lot the coming years from the best practices that we see in the country with the support from many actors. Thank you so much.